Ethan Hayes groaned as he rolled over in his small, uncomfortable bed. Sleep was hard to come by on a galactic station filled with aliens, all of whom had wildly different schedules and ideas of what quiet hours meant. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out the faint hum of the ventilation system and the distant echo of someone, or something, roaring in the hallways. But when he opened his eyes again, he froze. Hovering above him, barely an inch away, was Quelza, his alien roommate. Her 4 glowing, amber-colored eyes stared down at him, wide with something that looked like panic. Her bluish-gray tendrils twitched violently, and her sharp claws dug into the bedframe on either side of Ethan's head. Ethan's heart raced. Quelza, he said, his voice shaking. What the hell are you doing? Quelza didn't answer. Her body convulsed, and for a terrifying moment, Ethan thought she might attack him. Then suddenly, she collapsed onto him with a heavy thud, her tendrils draping limply over his chest. Great, Ethan muttered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Just another normal night with my totally normal alien roommate. He pushed her off gently, trying not to panic. Despite her sharp, insect-like exterior, her body felt unnervingly warm, almost like she was running a fever. As he laid her down on her bed, Ethan noticed something strange. Glowing, faintly pulsing symbols on her chest. They looked like ancient, angular writing. Definitely not part of her usual physiology. Okay, this is officially weird, he muttered. He grabbed his datapad and tried scanning the symbols, but the device flickered and died the moment he brought it close. Sparks flew from its edges, making him jump. Whatever was happening to Quelza, it wasn't natural. Just as Ethan was debating whether to call for medical help or keep this to himself, Quelza stirred. Her tendrils twitched weakly, and she opened her eyes, which now glowed even brighter than before. Ethan, she croaked, her voice raspy and unsteady. I'm here, he said, crouching beside her. What's going on? You scared the crap out of me. Quelza struggled to sit up, leaning heavily against the wall. I don't know. I felt something pulling me. Like an instinct, something ancient, buried deep in my mind. Ethan frowned. An instinct? What, like sleepwalking? No, Quelza said, shaking her head. Her tendrils coiled and uncoiled nervously. It was more than that. I felt a connection. To you. Ethan blinked. To me. What does that even mean? I don't know. Quelza snapped, then winced. Her claws scratched at her arms, and Ethan could see the frustration written all over her alien features. I've never experienced anything like this before. But those symbols. Ethan glanced at the glowing marks on her chest. Yeah, I noticed. They weren't there yesterday. Any idea what they mean? Quelza hesitated, her glowing eyes narrowing. They look familiar, like something I've seen in my people's history archives. But I can't remember where. Great. So we're dealing with ancient alien nonsense, Ethan said, running a hand through his messy hair. Typical. Quelza shot him an annoyed look, but her irritation quickly turned into concern. This isn't a joke, Ethan. If these symbols are what I think they are, we might be in danger. Ethan's stomach tightened. Danger? From what? Before she could answer, the dorm room lights flickered. A low hum filled the air, growing louder and deeper, until it felt like the walls themselves were vibrating. Quelza stiffened, her tendrils flaring out defensively. Do you hear that? She whispered. Ethan nodded, his throat dry. Yeah, and I don't like it. Suddenly, a bright beam of light shot down from the ceiling, illuminating the center of the room. Ethan shielded his eyes as a shimmering hologram materialized in the beam. It was a figure, tall, robed, and featureless. Its voice echoed in the small space, deep and mechanical. Human Ethan Hayes, it said, turning its gaze, or what Ethan assumed was its gaze, toward him. Your presence has been foretold. Ethan stared, dumbfounded. Foretold? What does that even? The hologram cut him off. Prepare yourself. The circle has begun. And just like that, the light vanished, leaving Ethan and Quelza alone in stunned silence. Ethan Hayes sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the empty spot where the hologram had appeared. The room was dark again, except for the faint glow of the strange symbols on Quelza's chest. She hadn't moved much since the hologram vanished, sitting cross-legged on her bed, her claws gripping the edges of her blanket. "What the hell was that?" Ethan finally asked, breaking the heavy silence. Quelza didn't respond at first. Her glowing eyes darted to the wall, then to the ceiling, as if she expected the robed figure to return. "I don't know," she said quietly, her voice laced with unease. "But it spoke to you directly. Why?" Ethan threw up his hands. "How should I know? I didn't sign up to be part of some cosmic prophecy." Quelza tilted her head, studying him. "Humans, always acting like you're the center of the universe." "Hey, I'm not the one glowing like a neon sign," Ethan shot back, pointing to the symbols on her chest. "Speaking of which, any chance you could explain that?" Quelza hesitated, her tendrils curling tightly against her back. "I've seen markings like these before," she admitted. "In my people's archives. They're connected to the Wrath." "The Wrath," Ethan repeated. "Who or what is that?" "An extinct species," Quelza said. "They were one of the first advanced civilizations in this galaxy. Legends say they unlocked the secrets of universal energy, power beyond anything anyone's seen since." "Let me guess," Ethan said, crossing his arms. "They destroyed themselves with it." Quelza nodded grimly. "That's the theory. No one knows for sure what happened, but their technology and symbols have shown up in ruins across the galaxy. And now, they're on me." Ethan leaned back against the wall, trying to process what she was saying. "Okay, so, why me? Why did that hologram call me out? I'm just a guy trying to pass his interspecies relations class." Quelza opened her mouth to respond but froze as the room's communication panel buzzed loudly. Both of them jumped. Ethan hesitated, then pressed the panel's button. "Hayes. Quelza? What's going on in there?" a gruff voice demanded. It was Krelvin, the station's security chief. Ethan shot a panicked look at Quelza. Nothing, sir. Just, studying." Krelvin snorted. "I've got reports of a massive energy surge coming from your room. Open the door, now." Ethan looked at Quelza, who shook her head urgently. "If they see these symbols, they'll take me," she whispered. "And they'll probably take you, too." Ethan swallowed hard. Sorry, sir. The doors. Jammed. Must be a technical issue." There was a long pause. Then Krelvin growled, "You've got 1 hour to report to station control, or I'm coming in myself." The comm panel clicked off. Ethan exhaled shakily and turned back to Quelza. 1 hour. We need answers. Fast." Quelza nodded. "There's someone who might be able to help. A galactic historian named Professor Varek. He specializes in Wrath artifacts. He's not far." "Not far," Ethan repeated suspiciously. Quelza glanced away. "He's in the restricted archives on Deck 17. Ethan groaned. "Of course he is. Why can't anything in my life be easy?" Reluctantly, he grabbed his jacket. "Fine. Let's go." The trip to Deck 17 was anything but smooth. Security patrols roamed the hallways, and Ethan found himself ducking into maintenance shafts and storage rooms more often than he liked. Quelza led the way, her movements surprisingly quiet for someone with claws and tendrils. When they finally reached the restricted archives, Ethan was out of breath. "Next time," he wheezed, "I'm signing up for yoga." Quelza ignored him, tapping a series of codes into the archive's control panel. The heavy metal door slid open with a hiss, revealing a dark, cluttered room filled with glowing data crystals and holographic screens. A hunched figure sat at the far end, his green-scaled hands tapping away at a console. He turned as they entered, revealing a long snout and sharp, reptilian eyes. "Varek," Quelza said, stepping forward. We need your help. Varek's eyes narrowed. Quelza, and a human, no less. He sniffed the air disdainfully. What trouble have you dragged me into this time? Quelza stepped aside, revealing the glowing symbols on her chest. Varek froze, his reptilian eyes widening. By the stars, he whispered. Those are Wrath glyphs. What have you done? Ethan sighed. Long story. But we've got less than an hour to figure it out. Varek turned back to his console, his claws flying over the keys. Then we'd better move quickly. If those symbols are what I think they are, you're in far more danger than you realize. Professor Varek worked in silence, his claws darting across the console like a musician playing an intricate instrument. Holographic projections of alien symbols, star maps, and untranslated texts floated around the room. Ethan and Quelza stood behind him, their nerves on edge. So, Ethan asked, breaking the silence, do you know what these symbols mean? Varek let out a low hiss, a sound Ethan assumed was his version of an annoyed sigh. These are indeed Wrath glyphs, the historian said, and they're not just decorative. They form a binding sequence. Quelza stiffened. Binding? What does that mean? Varek turned to face them, his sharp eyes narrowing. It means that these symbols have connected you to something, or someone. The Wrath were known for their experiments with resonance energy, a force that requires two beings to stabilize it. Two beings, Ethan repeated, his brow furrowing. Wait, are you saying these symbols are linking me and Quelza together? Exactly, Varek said. You and your roommate are now a resonance pair. Together, you can control energy that most beings can only dream of. Ethan groaned. Great, just what I needed. More responsibilities I didn't ask for. Quelza shot him an irritated look. You think I wanted this? I didn't even want a roommate. Enough, Varek barked, his voice sharp. This isn't the time for bickering. The binding isn't complete yet. If it's interrupted, or worse, exploited, you could both die. Or worse, unleash a catastrophe on this station. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Okay, so how do we stop it? Or I don't know, reverse it. You can't, Varek said simply. The process has already started. The only way forward is to stabilize the energy fully. And for that, he pointed to a holographic star map. You'll need to find the unbroken circle. Quelza's tendrils twitched. The unbroken circle. That's just a myth. Many thought so, Varek said, his voice grim. But the Wrath holograms you encountered suggest otherwise. If the circle is real, it's the key to balancing the energy coursing through both of you. Ethan squinted at the star map. So where is it? Varek hesitated. The circle is said to rest in the ruins of an ancient Wrath starship, a ship located in the quarantine sector of this station's neighboring galaxy. Ethan's jaw dropped. The quarantine sector. The one where people go and never come back. The same, Varek said, his tone unflinching. Ethan rubbed his temples. Of course. Why can't anything in my life ever be easy? As they left Varek's lab, the tension between Ethan and Quelza was thick enough to cut with a knife. I can't believe this is happening, Ethan muttered, shoving his hands into his jacket pockets. 1 minute I'm just trying to survive my alien roommate's weird habits, and the next I'm part of some galaxy-saving duo. Quelza rolled her eyes, her tendrils flicking with irritation. You think this is easy for me? My whole life, I've worked to be independent. Now, I'm tied to you. Ethan stopped walking and turned to face her. Hey, I didn't ask for this either. But like it or not, we're stuck with each other. So maybe, just maybe, we should try working together instead of tearing each other down. Quelza paused, her glowing eyes narrowing. She didn't respond immediately, but eventually her shoulders relaxed. Fine, she said, her voice quieter. We'll work together, but don't expect me to trust you completely. Not yet. Deal, Ethan said, offering a hand. She looked at it, then reluctantly shook it. Her claws were cold against his skin, but her grip was firm. Back in their dorm room, Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by maps and notes they had downloaded from Varroc's database. "So, what's our plan?" he asked, glancing at Quelza. She leaned over the maps, her tendrils brushing the edges of the papers. "The quarantine sector is heavily guarded. We'll need a ship, cloaking tech, and someone who knows the routes inside." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Do we know anyone like that?" Quelza hesitated, then sighed. "I might know someone, but they're not exactly reliable." "Define not reliable," Ethan said warily. Quelza's tendrils curled slightly. "Let's just say they owe me a favor, and they're probably going to make us regret asking." Ethan groaned. "Fantastic. I'm already regretting this whole thing." As they finalized their preparations, the room's comm panel buzzed again. Ethan tensed, but Quelza moved quickly to mute it. "Security's getting impatient," she said. "Then we'd better move fast," Ethan replied. They exchanged a glance, one that carried an unspoken agreement. Whatever lay ahead, they'd face it together. For better or worse, their bond was already growing stronger. Ethan and Quelza walked briskly through the station's dimly lit corridors, the air thick with the hum of distant machinery. Every few steps, Quelza glanced over her shoulder, her glowing eyes darting nervously. Ethan tried to act casual, but his heart pounded every time they passed a security camera. "Are you sure this friend of yours can help us?" Ethan whispered, trying to keep up with her quick pace. Quelza didn't look back. "Not a friend," she corrected. "An associate. And if we're lucky, they haven't skipped the station yet." They stopped in front of a battered service hatch that looked like it hadn't been used in years. Quelza knocked 3 times in quick succession, paused, then knocked twice more. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a loud clunk, the hatch slid open, revealing a scruffy-looking alien with orange scales and a pair of oversized goggles perched on his head. "Quelza," the alien drawled, his voice scratchy but amused. "To what do I owe the honor? Last time we met, you said you'd rather eat space dust than work with me again." Quelza crossed her arms. "And I meant it, Rax. But desperate times call for desperate measures." Rax's goggled eyes shifted to Ethan, and a slight grin spread across his face. "And who's this? Don't tell me you finally found yourself a partner." Ethan flushed. "It's not like that," he said quickly. "We're, roommates. Sort of." Rax let out a wheezing laugh. "Roommates? That's a new one." "Enough jokes, Rax," Quelza snapped. "We need a ship and cloaking tech, and we need it now." Rax leaned against the hatch frame, his grin fading. "Cloaking tech, huh? That's not exactly easy to come by. What are you two running from?" "It's not what we're running from," Ethan said. "It's what we're trying to find." Quelza hesitated, then showed Rax the glowing symbols on her chest. His eyes widened behind the goggles, and he whistled low. "Rathglyphs," he murmured. "I've only seen those once before, and the person wearing them didn't last long." "Thanks for the optimism," Ethan muttered. Rax straightened, his tone turning serious. "You realize what you're messing with, don't you? The kind of people who'd kill to get their hands on that kind of power." "That's why we need your help," Quelza said. "We're going to the quarantine sector to stabilize the binding sequence. If we don't—" She trailed off, but the tension in her voice said enough. Rax rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "All right, I'll help you, but it's going to cost you." Quelza narrowed her eyes. "We don't have time for games, Rax. Name your price." Rax smirked. "Simple. When this is over, you owe me a favor. A big one." Quelza hesitated, then sighed. "Fine. Deal." Rax led them to a hidden hangar on the lower decks, where a sleek, heavily modified ship sat waiting. Its black hull shimmered faintly under the dim lights, and its edges bristled with hidden weapons. "Meet the Shadowstalker," Rax said, patting the ship affectionately. "She's fast, stealthy, and most importantly, equipped with a prototype cloaking device. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Prototype? That doesn't exactly inspire confidence. Relax, Rax said with a grin. I've tested it. Mostly. Quelza ignored their banter and stepped onto the ship. Let's move. The longer we stay here, the more likely security will catch on. Once aboard, Ethan settled into the co-pilot's seat, while Quelza stood behind him, scanning the ship's layout. Rax took the pilot's chair, flipping switches and tapping at glowing controls. Strap in, Rax said as the ship hummed to life. Next stop, the quarantine sector. As they launched, Ethan stared out the viewport, watching the station shrink behind them. For a brief moment, he felt a pang of doubt. He had no idea what lay ahead, or if they'd survive it. Hey, Quelza said, her voice softer than usual. You all right? Ethan glanced at her, honestly. No, but I guess I don't have much choice, do I? Quelza gave a small nod. We'll figure this out. Together. Her words surprised him, but before he could respond, the ship's console beeped loudly. Guys, Rax said, his tone suddenly serious. We've got company. Ethan leaned forward, squinting at the radar. 3 blips were closing in fast. Pirates, Ethan guessed. Not just any pirates, Rax said grimly. These guys are bounty hunters, and they're locking onto us. Ethan felt his stomach drop. Please tell me that cloaking device works. Rax grinned, flipping a switch. Time to find out. The shadow stalker shimmered and vanished, just as the bounty hunters opened fire. The shadow stalker disappeared into the blackness of space, its cloaking device rendering it invisible to the naked eye and most sensors. Inside the cockpit, Ethan clutched the edges of his seat as the ship jolted to avoid incoming fire. Is it working? Ethan asked, his voice tight with panic. Rax grinned, his hands flying over the controls. Oh, it's working. But these bounty hunters didn't come here with second-rate gear. They'll find us if we don't lose them fast. Quelza leaned over the radar screen, her glowing eyes narrowing. They're using thermal trackers. If we push the engines too hard, we'll leave a heat trail. Ethan's eyes widened. So what do we do? Just float here and hope they don't notice us. Rax snorted. Not quite. I've got a trick or two up my sleeve. Hold tight. The bounty hunter ships closed in, their engines roaring as they scanned the area. One of the ships, a sleek, heavily armed fighter, fired a spread of missiles, each one glowing with an ominous red light. Ethan watched in horror as the missiles streaked toward them. Rax? Those look a lot less like missing us, and a lot more like hitting us. Rax flipped a switch, and the shadow stalker banked hard to the right. The ship dove toward a dense asteroid field, the missiles following in a deadly swarm. You're flying into an asteroid field. Ethan shouted. Relax, kid, Rax said, his grin unwavering. This baby's built for tight spaces. The shadow stalker weaved through the asteroids, its engines humming softly to minimize its heat signature. Behind them, the missiles exploded against the floating rocks, one by one. 2 down, 3 to go, Rax muttered, his fingers steady on the controls. Quill's tendrils twitched as she studied the radar. The bounty hunters aren't falling for it. They're splitting up to cover more ground. Smart, Rax admitted, a hint of admiration in his voice. Too bad for them. I'm smarter. He pulled the ship into a narrow crevice between 2 massive asteroids, the walls so close that sparks flew as the ship's wings grazed the surface. The remaining missiles followed, their guidance systems struggling to keep up. Rax, Quelza barked. If this plan doesn't work, I'm ejecting you first. Noted, Rax said, unfazed. As the crevice narrowed, Rax flipped another switch. The shadow stalker suddenly dropped, its engines cutting out completely. The ship drifted silently, hidden in the asteroid's shadow. The missiles, unable to adjust their trajectory in time, smashed into the asteroid's surface, exploding in brilliant bursts of light. Missiles neutralized, Rax announced, leaning back in his seat. Now we just need to lose their ships. Ethan exhaled shakily. That was way too close. Quelza ignored him, her focus on the radar. The hunters are still circling. We can't stay here forever. Rax smirked. Who said anything about staying? Watch and learn. He powered the engines back up, just enough to maneuver, and guided the Shadow Stalker out of the asteroid field. The cloaking device shimmered faintly, holding steady. They'll think we're still hiding in there, Rax explained. By the time they figure out we're gone, we'll be long out of range. Ethan glanced back at the radar, where the bounty hunters were still combing the asteroid field. I hate how good you are at this. Flattery will get you everywhere, Rax said with a wink. Once they were safely away, the tension in the cockpit eased slightly. Ethan leaned back in his seat, his heart still racing. So, he said, trying to lighten the mood, is it always this exciting being a smuggler? Rax chuckled. You'd be surprised how boring it gets. Not every job involves dodging missiles and bounty hunters. Quelza frowned. We're not out of danger yet. The quarantine sector isn't exactly welcoming. Ethan turned to her. What's in the quarantine sector anyway? Besides certain death. Quelza hesitated. The Raath ruins we're looking for are on a derelict starship, but the sector's been sealed off for decades because of anomalies. Anomalies, Ethan repeated. That's not exactly reassuring. No one knows what causes them, Quelza admitted. Ships vanish, systems malfunction, and anyone who goes too deep doesn't come back. Ethan sighed. Of course, because why wouldn't it be haunted space or whatever? Rax checked the navigation screen. We'll be at the sector's edge in a few hours. Get some rest while you can. As Rax set the autopilot, Ethan and Quelza exchanged a glance. For the first time, Ethan saw something other than annoyance in her glowing eyes, maybe even a hint of trust. Guess we're in this together, he said quietly. Guess we are, she replied, her voice softer than usual. For better or worse, their bond was deepening. And as they drifted toward the unknown, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The Shadow Stalker drifted into the quarantine sector, its sleek frame cloaked in near invisibility. The space around them seemed unnaturally quiet, the stars dimmer, as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath. Ethan sat in the co-pilot's seat, staring out at the emptiness. This place feels wrong, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Rax glanced at him, his usual smirk replaced by a rare look of seriousness. That's the anomalies messing with your head. Keep focused, or this place will eat you alive. Quelza was studying the ship's scanner, her glowing eyes narrowed in concentration. I'm picking up faint signals, she said. They're fragmented, but they match Raath frequencies. How far? Rax asked, adjusting the controls. Not far, Quelza replied. But the signals are unstable. They're coming from multiple directions. Rax muttered a curse under his breath. Classic anomaly tricks. They want us to split up or lose our way. Ethan frowned. They? What do you mean, they? Rax shrugged. Call it what you want. The anomalies, the sector, ghosts. Doesn't matter. Just don't let them get into your head. As they moved deeper into the sector, the ship's systems began to glitch. Lights flickered, and the radar showed random blips that appeared and disappeared. Ethan gripped his seat as a sudden jolt rocked the ship. What was that? He asked, his heart racing. Gravitational distortion, Quelza said, her tone tense. The sector's riddled with them. We need to adjust the ship's stabilizers. Rax was already on it, flipping switches and typing commands into the console. Relax, kids. I've flown through worse. The ship lurched again, this time harder. Alarms blared, and a crackling voice came through the comms. Help. Trapped. Can't. The signal was faint, distorted, and filled with static. Ethan's stomach twisted. Did you hear that? Someone's out there. Quell's tendrils twitched. It could be a distress call, or a trap. The anomalies are known to mimic signals. Ethan leaned forward, his instincts warring with his fear. But what if it's real? We can't just ignore it. Rax sighed. You're lucky I've got a soft spot for heroics, kid. We'll check it out, but if this goes sideways, it's on you. The signal led them to a derelict ship, its hull covered in strange, glowing symbols similar to those on Ethan and Quelza. The ship floated silently in the void, its lights long dead. That's not creepy at all, Ethan muttered as the shadow stalker docked with the derelict. Stay sharp, Quelza said, grabbing a small energy blade from a storage compartment. We don't know what we're walking into. Rax powered up a handheld scanner and smirked. Don't worry, I've got your backs. For now. They stepped onto the derelict ship, the air thick with the metallic scent of decay. The corridors were dark, lit only by the faint glow of the wrath glyphs etched into the walls. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Anyone else feel like we're being watched? No one's watching, Quelza said, her voice low. But this ship remembers. What does that even mean? Ethan asked, but she didn't answer. They followed the signal to what appeared to be the derelict's control room. Inside, a figure lay slumped over a console. Its body was skeletal, its features long gone, but its hand still clutched a strange device covered in wrath glyphs. Quelza moved cautiously toward the body. This is ancient, she murmured. Whatever happened here, it was a long time ago. Ethan's eyes were drawn to the device. The glyphs on it pulsed faintly, resonating with the symbols on his and Quelza's bodies. That thing, he said, pointing to it. It's connected to us. Before anyone could stop him, Ethan reached out and touched the device. The room exploded with light. Ethan found himself standing in a vast, glowing void. Symbols danced around him, shifting and morphing like living creatures. He turned to see Quelza beside him, her expression a mix of awe and fear. What is this? He asked. The resonance, Quelza said, her voice echoing strangely. We've been pulled into its core. A deep, rumbling voice filled the void. You have awakened the circle. Your bond will decide its fate. Ethan looked around, trying to find the source of the voice. Who are you? What do you want from us? The balance must be restored, the voice said, but only those who are truly united can succeed. Are you ready to face the trials? Ethan exchanged a glance with Quelza. Do we have a choice? No, she said simply. The light around them grew brighter, and the voice boomed again. Then the trials begin. Ethan and Quelza stood side by side, suspended in the glowing void. The shifting symbols around them intensified, forming intricate patterns that pulsed in rhythm with their heartbeats. The deep, rumbling voice boomed again. The trials will test your bond, your courage, and your will. Only the worthy may wield the wrath power. Ethan glanced at Quelza. Do you have any idea what we're supposed to do? No, she admitted, her glowing eyes scanning the swirling void. But whatever happens, stay focused. The anomalies feed on fear and doubt. Before he could respond, the void shifted. The light around them dimmed, replaced by a cold, suffocating darkness. Ethan blinked, disoriented, and found himself standing in a familiar setting, his childhood bedroom. The air smelled of dust and old books. A desk covered in unfinished homework sat against the wall, and a single lamp cast a dim glow over the room. This can't be real, Ethan muttered. From the corner of the room, a shadow shifted. It stretched unnaturally, taking the shape of a tall, humanoid figure with glowing red eyes. You abandoned them, the figure hissed, its voice a distorted echo of Ethan's own. You ran away when they needed you most. Ethan's chest tightened. No, I didn't. I couldn't help them. The shadow advanced, its presence suffocating. Excuses. You left them to fend for themselves. Weak, cowardly. Ethan stepped back, his legs trembling. I didn't have a choice. Meanwhile, Quelza found herself in a different scene. She stood on a battlefield, the air thick with smoke and ash. Around her, her people, tall, lithe beings like herself, lay scattered, their bodies broken. "You failed them," a voice said behind her. She turned to see a familiar face, her mentor, stoic and grim, his chest marked with glowing wrath symbols. His gaze was piercing, accusing. "You were meant to protect them," he said, his voice filled with bitterness. "Instead, you let them die." Quelza clenched her fists, her tendrils twitching with anger. "I fought with everything I had. I couldn't save them all." "You should have been stronger," her mentor said, stepping closer. "You should have sacrificed yourself for them." "I did sacrifice," she snapped, her voice trembling. "I've given everything for my people." Back in the void, the trials pushed Ethan and Quelza to their limits. The voices of doubt and fear grew louder, the illusions pressing down on them like a weight. Ethan fell to his knees, clutching his head. "This isn't real," he muttered. "This isn't real." But the shadow loomed over him, its red eyes burning brighter. "It's as real as your guilt," it hissed. Quelza, surrounded by the ghostly figures of her fallen comrades, felt her strength falter. The guilt clawed at her, threatening to pull her into despair. "No," she said, her voice firm. "I won't let this break me." The glowing wrath symbols on her chest flared brightly, and the battlefield illusion began to waver. Ethan saw the light from Quelza's glyphs, even through his illusion. The warmth of it reached him, cutting through the cold darkness of the shadow's accusations. "This isn't real," Ethan said again, louder this time. He stood, forcing himself to face the shadow. "You're not real, and you're wrong." The shadow recoiled slightly, but it didn't disappear. "I've made mistakes," Ethan said, his voice steady now. "But I also grown, and I'm not running anymore." His own glyphs glowed, their light merging with Quelza's. The shadow hissed, then shattered into 1,000 fragments, taking the illusion with it. Ethan and Quelza were back in the void, standing together. The swirling symbols surrounded them, brighter and more vibrant than before. The deep voice returned, its tone approving. "You have faced your fears and proven your resolve. The power of the wrath is now yours to command." The symbols converged, forming a radiant sphere of energy that hovered between them. Ethan and Quelza exchanged a glance, then reached up together. As their hands touched the sphere, a surge of energy coursed through them. The glyphs on their bodies pulsed with new life, their patterns interweaving like a shared heartbeat. "You are now bonded," the voice said. "Together, you hold the key to restoring balance." The void dissolved, and they found themselves back on the derelict ship. The once dead console flickered to life, displaying a map of the quarantine sector with a single location highlighted. Rax's voice crackled over their comms. "Are you two okay? You've been out for a while." Ethan smiled faintly, looking at Quelza. "Yeah," he said. "We're better than okay." As they boarded the Shadow Stalker again, Ethan couldn't help but feel a strange sense of unity with his unlikely roommate. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, human and alien, bound by the power of the wrath and an unbreakable trust.